Researchers analyzed data from the U.S. Census 1993 National American Housing Survey, which included a special neighborhood sample of more than 1,000 homes and their 10 nearest neighbors to assess satisfaction. Most housing data tend to focus on either housing units or people, not both. This section of the 1993 survey is rare in that sense, and it's something that likely won't be replicated, Coleman says, due to increased efforts to avoid identification of survey respondents. Coleman's model shows that those living in the smallest house in the neighborhood are on average 5% more likely to report they are dissatisfied with their unit than are those living in the largest house. The reason I look at size as opposed to other housing characteristics is that size is easy to measure and compare, he says. If size matters, there are probably a lot of other housing characteristics that matter too, such as the age of housing to remember what we said and did after that extra drink the night before, and then suddenly the memories vividly resurface. The writer says alcohol disinhibits us, making us say and do things that we'd otherwise keep under wraps. People often drink to gain Dutch courage in a demanding situation. Many of us can understand the appeal of having a drink before a blind date or a social event. It can help to calm our nerves and cultivate confidence. That's because alcohol has a depressant effect, which makes us feel more relaxed. The writer says, of course, alcohol's effects aren't all positive. We've all adopted nicknames for the characters that we become after a few drinks. Maybe you're the happy drunk, or perhaps you've built a reputation for being the aggressive drunk, who takes everything the wrong way after a pint. The relationship between alcohol and antisocial behavior is well documented, both anecdotally and in research. Plenty of arguments and fights stem from someone having had too many. Scientists believe we behave like this when drunk because we misinterpret social situations and lose our sense of empathy. In essence, the writer says, once we start slurring words and stumbling, our ability to understand or share the emotions of others goes out of the door too. If someone has done something wrong while under the influence of alcohol, we tend to give them a get-out-of-jail-free card rather than hold them accountable for their actions. We also extend these excuses to ourselves. The writer says, in our research, we've attempted to paint a clearer picture of how drinking alcohol, empathy, and moral behavior are related. It turns out that while consuming alcohol might affect our empathy, making us respond inappropriately to other people's emotions and reactions, this doesn't necessarily change our moral standards or the principles we use to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. In a recent experiment, the writer says, we gave participants shots of vodka and then measured their empathy and their moral decisions. We presented images showing various people expressing emotions to our participants. After having a high dose of vodka, people began to respond inappropriately to these emotional displays, reporting that they felt positively about sad faces and negatively about happy faces. The writer says the more intoxicated people were, the more impaired their empathy became. Having a few drinks weakened people's abilities to understand and share the emotions of others. The writer asks, did this have an effect on their morality? We had people tell us what they thought they would do in a moral dilemma, and then also looked at what they actually did in a simulation of a moral dilemma in virtual reality. Consider what you might do in one of these situations. A runaway trolley is heading down some rail tracks towards 5 construction workers who can't hear it approaching. You're standing on a footbridge in between the approaching trolley and the workers. In front of you is standing a very large stranger. If you push the stranger onto the tracks below, the large bulk will stop the trolley. This one person will be killed, but the 5 construction workers will be saved. Would you do it? The writer says while alcohol might have impaired the empathy of our participants, it didn't have an effect on how they judged these moral situations or how they acted in them. If someone chose to push the person off the footbridge in order to save more lives while sober, they did the same thing when drunk. If people refuse to sacrifice the person's life in the same situation because they believe the killing was wrong regardless of the consequences, they also did the same when drunk. The writer says it turns out that while we might believe that alcohol changes our personalities, it doesn't. You're still the same person after a drink, your existing sense of morality left intact. So while alcohol might affect how we interpret and understand the emotions of other people, we can't blame our immoral behaviors on alcohol. Drunken you has the same moral compass, and so you are responsible for your moral and immoral actions, whether you've had a few drinks or not. According to the University of Michigan, they've got research which indicates negative outcomes for Native American children who are spanked. They say some people may believe that if you live in a community with different cultural values, spanking might not be harmful, an assumption that does not appear to be correct according to the university. In the first longitudinal examination of the effects of spanking, I think in the UK we say smacking. I could be wrong, but I think that's what they mean here. Among the Native American population, researchers say spanking is just as harmful for them as it is for similarly associated with detrimental outcomes among white, black, and American Indian children in the US. In the long term from misbehaving, but you have to do something to get their attention then and there. If you've got a dog, it's the same principle. You're not necessarily curbing the bad behavior in the long term, you're just punishing it straight after the event, the bad behavior. So if you're having to smack your children, there are good chances that in the future you'll still be smacking them. That doesn't mean to say the smacking causes the bad behavior. The smacking goes hand in hand with the bad behavior, but it's a way to control them. That's what I think. What do you think? Get in touch and give us your comments, your thoughts, your views and suggestions. This is the English program. Here's a question for you. Are attitudes contagious? If you were to meet two new people and others seem to be more friendly toward one of those individuals, would that lead you to like that person more than the other? Well, research at Northwestern influenced their attitudes. Only about 30% of people indicate life. These findings suggest that when we see people being less friendly toward one individual relative to another, we often attribute the unfriendliness to the target, believing that we like them less because they do not seem to be very friendly, when in fact it is others who are not very friendly to them. The researcher says it is possible that this research also may lay the foundation for group-based biases. These studies build upon prior work for showing that attitudes toward racial groups can be influenced by non-verbal signals. For example, white people in the US who observe white people displaying negative non-verbal signals toward black people tend to go on to show more anti-black bias than those who are exposed to a positive non-verbal signals directed toward a black person. That can help. And so the writer is talking about the singer Karen Carpenter, who died aged 32 in 1983. Her heart gave out because of Nervoso was not coined until shortly after she died, but of course a disease can exist prior to being named. She did not have all the symptoms associated with the modern diagnosis, but most mental disorders vary from patient to patient. Anorexia is often seen as an expression of will, an assertion of autonomy and control by a young woman who is engaged in a battle with her family and therapists. If that's the crucial point about anorexia, then maybe she was anorexic. Her fast turned her whole domestic world upside down, and she maintained it right to the end. In her 1988 History of Anorexia Fasting Girls, Joan Jacobs Brumberg, noting the presence of the medical team watching in her room, asserted that the girl was killed by experimental design, but maybe she died of pride. If the assertion of will over both one's own appetite and the authority of others is the heart of anorexia, then perhaps we can push its history back further. In Holy Anorexia 1985, Rudolf Bell argued that anorexia shaped the lives of many medieval saints and other holy women who ate next to nothing. Saint Catherine of Siena fasted for days, far beyond what was expected of even the most pious young women in 14th century Italy. She did so even when the male priests she was supposed to defer to expressly told her to eat something, on the grounds that her spiritual husband, Jesus himself, outranked them. For Bell, it is Catherine's assertion of her will — she sent angry letters to the Pope — that marks her out and puts her in a long line of anorexics extending to the present day. Brumberg attacked Bell for assuming the female psychology has not changed over the centuries and that the past and present are the same. But that's unfair, the writer says. It is certainly possible to acknowledge that both psychology and culture are treated as normal. Is it the same disease or not? The writer says, well, if you think mental illness is above all a problem with a neurological system, then there might seem to be an easy answer. The disease label refers to what is going wrong with the brain, and the cultural context just supplies the input and output. Take an anorexic brain and plug it into 14th century Italy, and you get one set of symptoms, the writer says. Plug it into modern Western societies, and you get another. The different symptoms are reflections of different cultures acting on the brain. Joel and Ian Gold in Suspicious Minds have discussed the emergence of what they consider to be a new form of psychopathology, the Truman Show delusion, in which, like the hero of the movie of that name, subjects imagine themselves as the star of a reality TV show. The existence of the show is known but kept secret by their friends. The Golds argue that the delusion was causing participants with heightened risk of victimization to participate in a meeting known as a call-in. At the call-in, a collaborative group of criminal justice agencies, service providers, and community members discuss the risk of victimization and the damage caused by gun violence to communities. The participants also may be referred or given information about local social service programs. Part of the program's design is that those invited to the call-in would hopefully carry this message back to those in their own social networks. The researchers say in the study we examined whether VRS reduced gunshot victimization among participants. We also evaluated the effect of VRS on the social peers of participants. While these peers did not participate in the program, they had social contact with a participant and may therefore have been affected by the program through spillover effects. In total, 2,349 people were invited to participate in VRS from 2010 to 2016, 1,642 of whom attended a call-in meeting. VRS reduced gunshot victimization among participants by around 3 programs. However, the researchers say, much of that research looks at particular geographic regions in which a program might have come about. In addition, the researchers say our findings also suggest that the power of networks might be leveraged in other gun violence reduction strategies, such as street outreach efforts of trauma-based interventions that hope to reduce violence and save lives. Earlier this month, Santosh Vijay Kumar, Vice-Chancellor's Senior Research Fellow in Digital Health at Northumbria University in Newcastle, published an article, Pseudoscience is Taking Over Social Media and Putting Us All at Risk. In the publication, the academic argued that if you search for climate change on YouTube, before long you'll likely find a video that denies it exists. In fact, when it comes to shaping the online conversation about climate change, a new study suggests that deniers and conspiracy theorists might hold an edge over those believing in science. Researchers found evidence that most YouTube videos relating to climate change oppose the scientific consensus that it's primarily caused by human activities. The study, he says, highlights the key role of social media use in the spread of scientific misinformation, and this suggests that scientists and those who support them need to be more active in developing creative and compelling ways to communicate their findings. But more importantly, we need to be worried about the effects that maliciously manipulated scientific information can have on our behavior, individually and as a society. The recent study by Joachim Allgeier of RWTH Aachen University in Germany analyzed the content of a randomized sample of 200 YouTube videos related to climate change. He found that a majority, 107, of the videos either denied that climate change was caused by humans or claimed that climate change was a conspiracy. The videos peddling the conspiracy theories received the highest number of views, and those spreading these conspiracy theories used terms like geoengineering to make it seem like their claims had a scientific basis when in fact they did not. Climate change is far from the only area where we see a trend for online misinformation about science triumphing over scientifically valid facts. Take an issue, the writer says, like infectious diseases, and perhaps the most well-known example of the measles, mumps, rubella, MMR vaccine. Despite large amounts of online information about the vaccine's safety, false claims that it has harmful effects have spread widely and resulted in plummeting levels of vaccination in many countries around the world. But it's not just well